I was homeschooled for 10 years, and while most of it I view very positively, there's three main things that I wish could have been done maybe a little bit differently. Hey, my name is Jacob Gooden, and if you're new here, this is the Ex-Homeschoolers Club, the best ex-homeschooler podcast this side of the internet. Normally, I've got guests on. We chat about the good, the bad, and the ugly of growing up a homeschool kid. So if that's you, you're in the right place, okay? And for anyone who's returning, hey, how's it going? Welcome back. You heard me right. I'm going to talk about three things that I would do differently in my homeschool experience. I want to preface with this. I was homeschooled for 10 years. From second grade all the way through high school. I think my parents did a decent job. I think it turned out okay. I'm not the dumbest guy in the room, also maybe not the smartest guy in the room, but I made it. I'm an adult. I'm surviving. We're okay. That being said, I think that there's three things that if I could go back in time and tell my parents at a younger age, be like, hey, I think maybe do these. These are them. So, number one, I think just a better understanding of how our country works. And I'm speaking from a United States of America perspective here, but how does our country work? I sometimes question that day to day. And, I have a decent understanding of history, right? I understand how this country came to be. I understand the founding documents. I've read all that stuff. I understand there's three branches of government. Like, I get it. I think what was missing was maybe not so much of the class aspect of like, here's how government works. What I think was missing was seeing how it plays out and affects our day-to-day lives. So for me, I look at that and I go, I think the missed opportunity was an involvement in local and state politics. Now, that doesn't mean like I wanted to be governor of California or, even serve in local government. But I think it would have been really cool to do field trips to state capitol. I think it would have been really fun to meet elected officials and be able to ask them about their job and what they do and how they vote and how they listen to their constituents. Going to town hall meetings and like learning about what that looks like and how do we stand up. And, these are our elected officials. We put them in office to enact the will of the people, and we are the people. So how do we communicate that best to them? And I think it would have just been really cool to have a lot of those real hands-on experiences, right? And homeschooling is a hands-on experience. A lot of people cite that as being one of the main reasons they want to homeschool, right? Is that ability to give their kids like unique experiences. What better way than like teach them how the world works? So I think that now as an adult and getting much more heavily involved in politics and an understanding of how this country works, I look at it and I go, this would have been so easy to accomplish. It's time consuming, obviously, but it would have been, the information is there, so to speak. It's just a matter of actually like going and doing it. So that's number one. Number two is that I would push back on my parents a little bit of involving religion in every curriculum that we had. Now, I think religion can be important, and for a lot of homeschool families, religion is like a key proponent of why you homeschool your kids. For the person I am today, that's not a good enough reason to homeschool your kids, is religion solely. But I do understand it, right? I understand wanting to have a little bit more control over the things that your child is learning. When you limit everything that you're being taught into a bubble, and religion to some degree is a bubble, you block out voices that could have compelling arguments. And so for me, I think being able to, as I've gotten older and being able to explore a more diverse look at the world and ask questions of other religions and other belief systems and things like that, it's been very eye-opening to kind of just like feel it out, right? And figure out what I believe on my own. So let me give you kind of an example, right? Because I can talk hypotheticals all day, but let me give you an example. Science, for a lot of Christian homeschoolers, is very Bible-based, right? And so you have this historical part and this faith-based part, right? And they work together to reconcile it, right? So we believe in like young earth. We believe in, literal 7-day creation as a Christian. I'm speaking as a Christian at this point. We believe in things like Noah's Ark, right? And Noah's Ark being a key catalyst in the laying down of a ton of fossils that we find today, right? And So I grew up believing all of this. And yeah, there was maybe a little bit of an emphasis on like evolution, but it was always from a standpoint of, yeah, but evolution has already been debunked. We know that that's not true. So kind of don't worry about it. Which creates in itself its own problems of like, evolution is not debunked, first and foremost. Some people would argue it is, but I don't think it is. It's a commonly held belief by many people that that's what happened, right? And so rather than just kind of like pushing it off to the side and saying, oh, that's an already debunked theory, we don't really need to focus too much on it. Here's like an overview of understanding it. I think that being able to look at, let's talk about creation. I think being able to look at an account of here's how we think the world started, right? From a biblical perspective of God spoke it into existence, and it was a literal 7 days, and he built all of these things in those days, to looking at like an evolutionary perspective and understanding, okay, so the Big Bang, like let's talk about that, and let's look at the intricacies of what would need to happen to do that, right? Can we replicate that? Is that being replicated in other galaxies? Those types of questions. And then you talk about the evolution of like, where do trees come from? Where does human come from? Where does human come from? Where do humans come from? Another really interesting one, and I learned more about this when I got to college because I took geology when I was in college. It was a rocky time, if you will. But I thought one of the most interesting parts about that class was we were discussing how rock layers were laid down over time, and how to assess the amount of time between rock layers. And so I grew up believing, again, the Bible, and believing in Noah's Ark and the worldwide flood, right? And also believing that that was a massive catalyst in the world that killed thousands, millions, I don't know, lots of living beings. And they were, buried underwater and under soil and things like that, right? And so when we are looking at like the fossils and we're looking for fossils, we can find stuff from that time. And then I took this geology class, and like I said, it was interesting to talk about the length of time and understanding how, if you've ever looked at a rock structure, let's talk about the Grand Canyon. Like if you've ever been to the Grand Canyon, you look at the Grand Canyon, it's like all these lines up the Grand Canyon. And it's really fascinating how it's time, right? It's a symbol of time that's going up. And so to look at the opposition of Christianity, which, is that these layers get laid down over thousands, hundreds, thousands, millions of years. Things get trapped inside of them, and what that means, right? And how do things get trapped inside of them? Sometimes it's quickly by rushing water. Sometimes it's slow by dying out in the wilderness and rotting away. And then, over time, just dust blows and, maybe some waters come through and whatever else. But that diversity of like thinking, I thought was really interesting. And again, I went to a Christian college, so a lot of this still steeped in religion when it comes to the sciences. But starting to ask those questions of like, well, what if, and some people would argue those are really dangerous. It's really dangerous to ask questions. I don't think so. I personally think it's really fun because it pushes you to find answers, right? And the strongest argument I always hear for faith is that, well, at some point you just got to believe, right? You just got to take a leap of faith, so to speak. And this episode is not meant to be, sway you on religion or anything like that. But I always find it interesting because in conversations I have with friends who are still believers and still believe in like literal 7-day creationism and young earth theory and things like that, it's always interesting because we get to a point in the conversation where sometimes they just go, well, okay, but at some point you just got to like have faith that this is what it is. And ultimately, yeah, I understand. Like, I also have to have faith that in whatever I believe of like, how did the world really start? So anyway, the reason I bring this up as a point that I would change in my curriculum is not so much of being like, oh, well, now I'm not a Christian and I wish that my parents had given me the knowledge beforehand. No, I bring it up because initially when I was presented with these ideas, they became really good talking points for me to like discuss and ask questions about. And I think that was so much lacking in my my curriculum growing up, everything was faith-based, from science to English to math to just everything was just had this layer of Christianity in it. Once I stepped outside of that and I started to be able to ask questions about other religions, I loved Greek mythology growing up, but it was just that. It was mythology. It was a storytelling mechanism, right? And it was an explanation as to why the world was the way it was. Why did it thunder? Oh, well, it must have been Zeus, right? And what happens when you die? Well, you go to the underworld, and there's Hades, right? And I loved Greek mythology because I looked at it as this kind of an explainer of the world before we had modern day science. As humans, we put these characters, so to speak, on these pedestals to look at. But I never really understood why we didn't actually look at it from the perspective of there were people who fully believed this, who were dedicated to this type of religion. Why was that? What led them to that? And so I think just the diversity aspect of it would have been really cool to understand. We'll argue modern day religion. Why do Buddhists believe what they believe? Why do Mormons believe what they believe? How is it really all that different? And less so from a combative space, because I think maybe that's more what I have the issue with, is the combative place of religion in our curriculums, where it was always Christianity is right 100% of the time. All other religions are fake. And so you go into it with a jaded knowledge that all other religions are already fake. So I don't really, they hold no authority over me. And I don't know. I just think it's an interesting thing if you can teach somebody to maybe put that opposite thinking on temporarily, to be like, okay, what would it take for me to actually believe this other thing? Maybe that's more what I'm getting at. So you could disagree with me. That's fine. I'm totally down for that. And this, again, is some dude on the internet just sharing his thoughts of what he would change about his homeschool experience. The last point I wanted to talk about was less from an education perspective in the traditional sense of like a curriculum, and more from like an emotions and psychological perspective. And that was, I think that my parents could have done a better job of teaching me boundaries. My homeschooling experience was, I'm not going to say unique. I think everybody's is unique. There was 4 of us that lived in that house, and 2 of us were homeschooled, and 2 of us were the adults. None of us, I think, were super emotionally healthy people. And so I don't hold anything against my parents. I think they did the best they could with what they were given. And what's cool is now, as we've gotten older and we've all become much more emotionally healthy, I think we are just in better places with each other to some degree, or we understand ourselves better and maybe know how to communicate it better. So I want to kind of preface with that. But boundaries for me is something that is one of my big focuses for 2025. And as I've been working on it and learning the power of no and things like that, I keep getting reminded of experiences from when I was a kid. And when I was in high school and junior high, one of my friend's dads was just like a very hugging person. He was very like, he just liked hugs. And that doesn't necessarily sound really bad on the surface, but I remember feeling uncomfortable hugging him. And I never, for a long time, I don't think I really understood why that was. And now that I'm maybe a little bit more emotionally healthy and I can kind of look back on the time, I realized that it was more than just like hugs. He would hug for too long. He would always make comments to me and the other guys about like, you know, how strong we were and how he wanted to wrestle us. And maybe it was a sexual thing. Now that I'm saying this out loud, I don't really know, but it made me uncomfortable. Let's just say that. And I think I would remove myself from situations sometimes to try to get away from it. Didn't always escape. But I think looking back on it, I go, man, I wish I would have just had the power to say, no, I don't do that. I don't hug adults. You know, I don't feel comfortable with this. You know, I don't feel comfortable going to this person's house. I don't feel comfortable being around their dad, whatever it might have been, right? But there was a lack of skills and language with the ability to set that boundary to say, no, this is my personal space. You're invading my personal space, and I feel uncomfortable. And I think I would have probably benefited from some therapy as a kid. Like I said, my family was not the most emotionally healthy family. I think any of us would be pretty quick to tell you that. But as I look back and I go, man, those boundaries would have been nice to have. I also look back and I go, for the closeness that my family has now and the ability to converse about things, my dad and I in particular, my mom and I, they've been on this podcast. We've talked about this before. If you're interested in that, go check out those interviews with them. I think they're really good. But our ability to communicate now, the three of us, and talk about the things that were hard and painful, that we disliked, we have that now. And I look at it and I go, man, could we have done this when I was 12? And so I say that not so much from a place of like longing to go back. But from a place of like, for those of you who are where you are now and you feel that way, go do it. Go get the help, because man, the ability to have conversations with difficult people sometimes, and mom, dad, I'm not saying you're difficult, but the ability to know the skills that you have to have those conversations, to put words to the emotions that you feel, is absolutely incredible, and has been, I think, one of the biggest game changers in my life, and is still growing, and still I'm not perfect at it. We're getting there. So yeah, I think encouraging emotional health in school would have been a game changer. I think those are the main three things. One, a better understanding of how our country works, the government, played out by actual like experience going to those places, asking questions of elected officials, getting involved in, I don't know, town halls, protests, understanding how our voting system works. Number two, I think it would have been really cool to have curriculum that expanded upon the religious beliefs of others, and from a neutral point, not a jaded one-sidedness of Christianity is always right and these rest are already debunked beliefs. I think having that expansion of being able to look at them and put those shoes on, those hats on, whatever you want to call it, to look through the eyes of someone who believes something a little bit different would have been really cool. And also access to people to ask questions. You know, most people are very friendly. Most people want to share what they believe with you. And if you do it right, you can do it in a non-hostile type of way and still walk away being friends. And then the third thing, setting boundaries for myself, more than just saying no, but, you know, I look at my life even today and recognize that, like, I struggle with the clients I work with, sometimes telling them no and ending up working extra hours for things that I don't get paid enough to do, you know? And so looking at that and going, man, is this a skill that I could have learned back at a younger age? And so emotional health and learning how that plays a role in your education and being the healthiest version of yourself. And so, yeah, those are really the main three things. I know hopefully it's not anything too shocking. Thank you for listening. Thank you for supporting. And yeah, I don't know. I got anything else? I don't think so. Tune in next week. We'll have another great episode. And if you stayed this long, maybe think about joining my newsletter. All right. Until next time. All right. Peace.